it's just coming up on 9:34 p.m. on Saturday, the 23rd of November 2019. I've done a little bit of a pre-record to get things moving. And we're going to chat about where consciousness in the human experience currently resides as far as our timeline is concerned, and the way that it's splitting down the middle and veering off to a number of different alternate and parallel realities. So let's get into it, shall we? Okay, welcome one and all. It's the 23rd of November in the year 2019. Number 23, other auspicious. And as I've already stated on the Twin Peaks, What Lies Beneath podcast, we've got a very, very interesting sky configuration about before we get into this rather special broadcast, which is a one-on-one with myself, someone that I consider a great mentor in America, Guy Lozier, also known Mark, who is an American author, filmmaker, publisher. He has been dealing with the deeper esoteric plans for the planet from off-planet entities, dimensional entities, etc., for quite some time, and I feel very blessed and very lucky to count him as a very close and good friend. He felt compelled when I reached out to him to be a guest on this particular SENCE platform to talk very specifically about something that affects us all. So I find it, which always is the precursor, the setting that I like to put in place before I actually get into the guts of the discussion, or the meat and potatoes of the insight are being offered for our spiritual well-being and alignment. That in the last 24 to 48 hours we've had Mars in Scorpio, and that's significant because it's also being opposed by Uranus and Taurus. And then that is part of a larger conjunction with both Venus and Jupiter. So let me just start by saying that for that to sort of also fall on 23, which is a number associated with the Corpus Callosum, the Illuminati, the Masons, the Red Circle, the Khazarian. There's so many different splinter groups, fragmented control groups that hold the number 23 when it comes to numerology. And all numerology is very, very much a larger part of the sacred geometry, right? All geometry is the empirical language of the universe, the natural defined order of the universe. So the first thing we wanted to be able to draw attention to is the fact that Venus conjunct Jupiter, as Jupiter has been in has not been stopped by anyone on the planet since 1935. Won't go into reasons why or where I got the information. It's just suffice to say that whatever the energy brings in the next day, 2 days, we'll never experience it again in this lifetime. And it's significant for a number of reasons, because you'll be listening to my doppelganger series, which I have to admit has been a bit splintered, because there's been a lot to talk about. And while my doppelganger is my own, one on experience getting to know my darker shadow self, who has been illuminating, to say the least, and I'll talk more about that in the Twin Peaks podcast, particularly the last one, which is called the merger of light between two worlds, more and more, is essentially to recognize that the planets themselves have been evolving. Now, one of the things that we feel when we have something like, Scorpio and Mars, is that Mars is this kind of warrior energy. It's about get up and go. It's about get done. It's about let's just stop mucking around and look at everything at face value and state for the record what's really truly serving us in any given moment and get on with it. And then when that's in Scorpio is very good at hiding its true agenda, its true feelings, its true emotion. It loves to present itself in the meta language of how it kind of turns on itself and sticks itself. So it's sometimes too good for its own good. So we have a very, very interesting opposition, and this is taking their ninth house, divine and or sacred connection to the higher realms of the universe. So when we have that sort of energy where we've got this maverick, let's get up and go, but we're hiding why we feel so motivated to get up and go, we then have to look at it through the mirror in a sort of a more opposites attract kind of reflection of Uranus in Taurus. Now, Uranus is very much in retrograde. Mercury is about to go direct today or tomorrow. But Uranus is in retrograde, and it is essentially still, of course, in Taurus for the next 7 years. And about at 3 degrees. So it's slowly creeping in and making it stable. So this is also a very good reflection. I'm going to keep using that word, this reflective medium of this maverick planet of change and interdependence and, let's do exactly what the predictable response trigger would be. Let's do the opposite to it. But that's happening in Taurus is very much grounded and fixed earth, where we want, to have our feet firmly planted on the ground. We're not all about going out there and exploring something new, particularly when we've got maverick energy working in a opposition to it. So look at that as you kind of feeling somewhat stifled. When you feel stifled, it's like get enough air. It's like you've got a lot to say or you've got a lot to express, but you don't have a lot of the sustenance, the nutrition and the nourishment to do so. And that's because the energy is asking you to once again take a back seat, sit down in a quiet space, remove all the monkey chatter and all the clutter of the 3D drama, and see straight down the guts of it what lies smack in the middle of the core of my intention right now. Am I making myself available to the universe to come along and ultimately support it? Well, many of us aren't doing that at all. Many of us are looking for that pocket of safety and security, which is, I know that if I go down this road and this particular pattern, that I've always found myself in a good place here. And that's a sort of an illusory or a deceptive sense of defining yourself in this new energy. So that's kind of where, or to a degree, since I launched the Twin Peaks What Lies Beneath podcast, and I've connected with some very specific and high octave intelligence in very young millennial type people. And the thing that I've ascertained from this rather emergent and resurgent energy coming from them is that they're really, really about stepping up to the plate and making their thoughts and their actions, and to a greater degree, their suppressed look at the belief structures that are shaping their lives, they're about being in their power when they do that. And that's kind of elevating their conscious outlook, and many of them are vertically integrating into what is known as a biosphere consciousness or outlook. How can we support the planet without putting so much pressure on her all the time? This is giving people this moment of pause. And in this moment of pause, while I was going through launching that new podcast, which is very cryptic, very deep, it's very detailed, and it's based in a meta language, which for a lot of us older exponents of the planet don't really understand what meta is, what the modern meta myth. A few of my compadres are very, very good at expressing and understanding. And the meta monomyth is really about media presented to us today from all different angles, whether it's online through YouTube or whether it's through streaming services like Netflix and Amazon, as well as the Foxtel, and of course, it's essentially media that is very consciously aware of itself. It understands the means by which it delivers itself through the airwaves, the electrical impulses that the airwaves generate, right, from the conscious receptors, recipient. So it's media that's self-aware. And there is a lot of programming on network and on the services that is very much aligned to and geared to meta. One of the first meta language genres was Star Wars and Star Trek, because it came from an otherworldly space. And this is important to understand, because the millennial generation, which is the young, the Gen Y, Gen X, whatever you want to call them, they are being predominantly immersed in that from the get-go. I mean, they're born into it. It's culturally integrated within the framework of their being, so they understand this transhuman agenda that's starting to unfold. The fusion of the flesh, that is the human blueprint, with the AI, with the VR and the AI and the cyborg machine-like application that the human genome is becoming more and more. So I'm giving you the background. And if for those who want to immediately kind of go, oh, yeah, I know what you mean by meta, well, look at the meta language of today. Look at the meta form being used today. Of course, for me, David Lynch and Twin Peaks and all his films are the most detailed and rather deep exponents of the meta form, the meta language. But then we have Watchmen at the moment on air, which is very powerful. His Dark Materials, which is very powerful. The OA, the in-between, Undone, Lodge 49. Of course, you had the SENCE one. I can't remember its name just offhand. You had the OA. A lot of the vampire and zombie Walking Dead, that's very meta. Vampire Diaries and True Blood and the originals is all very meta. So there's a real meta language that's emerging, and of course a lot of it is rather wrapped up in that Kabbalist Illuminati style of, control and, subversive, consumable violence that we get addicted to, and all other types of meta forms or meta reflections that are playing out, but they're all predominantly coming from a rather aware, artificial intelligence, AI, is a self-aware apparatus and application that is programmed in order to be able to streamline certain physical processes. So I find it very interesting that while that's all playing out with the energies that I've described, Mars in Scorpio, opposing Uranus in Taurus, conjuncting Venus and Jupiter. This is a very, very powerful precursor to what's going to be the new moon in Sagittarius. And today, on the 23rd, we actually have the Sun enter into Sagittarius. Sagittarius is known by many, many different names, astrology, but it's predominantly geared around, like Jupiter, its counterpart, its home sign is essentially very much about being expansive, not looking at complacency, not locking in into a particular recycle pattern that is very staid or stale or static. So bringing it full circle, I think it's very opportune that I kind of reached out to Mark with these questions relating to meta, relating to what is known as a split in the timeline, and he came back with a very interesting response. Now, I will let people know, as a heads up, Mark's not the type of person that minces words, right? He's very, very specific in the way that he delivers his own language when it comes to our species on planet Earth, our shift away from the linear and somewhat programmed timeline of the 3D and into densities of conscious understanding, exposure and space. So I'm very pleased to bring forward now and release to everybody some very powerful insights that affect every man, woman and child and soul on the planet, and explains a little bit about what's going to happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Now, many of us, of course, me included, are going to shake off this mortal coil well and truly before that. So I am going to see, I'm not going to be blessed with the opportunity to see humanity literally turn itself completely around and stop this constant, vying for airtime in the geopolitical structure and the somewhat antiquated, centralized institutionalized and centralized constructs more and more. That's all going to fall apart. This is the last gasp of the cabal, this whole thing with the Trump administration and impeachment. It's all wrapped up in an illusory lens that is a fugazi. Fugazi is a fake or a falsehood wrapped up in a mask of rubbish, bullshit, and maya and drama. So don't worry, stop worrying so much about the so-called fear-mongering that's happening at every level of what is considered to be the compartmentalized societal outlook, right? Any form of community is built up with exactly that. It has structural elements to it, which are predominantly underpinned by rules and regulations, and even higher up the food chain when you're bringing in, the religions, etc., into the whole kind of dogmatic and dogma principle. So without further ado, here's a candid insight from Guy Lozia, Mark, my friend Mark in America, based over in Oklahoma. And I hope you guys really enjoy what he has to say. And once again, please, it's time, if this is resonating particularly with your heart energy, that is the energy field that encompasses the interface around your heart, then have the courage to comment, because it's getting a conversation started in this new meta language that's really, really going to shake things up and accelerate the integration of these very new methods and means and ways of doing things. Thanks.
Mike, thanks for giving me this opportunity to present another perspective for your podcast. To answer your questions is rather difficult, so I'm going to answer your questions this way. The human consciousness is going through changes which coincide with what the planet is going through currently along our timeline. The planet has already begun to interact in the fifth density realities, and we've lagged behind. So the planet is assisting us with its compressing fields. It continues to compress our illusory reality, which in turn affects focused consciousness by feeling what it's doing as it is progressing. These effects or these events have affected others that are attempted to control humans and their activities along our timeline. Effectively, they've been programming the timeline, but things have changed. Because of our potential and much assistance, we now are changing the timeline by wiring off to rewrite our timeline. We've already begun those steps in the recent past, so we are now sitting on the wide timeline. And some of the current responses will begin nearly immediately as transparency will become the dominant force across many platforms and cause a positive shift. The situation is extremely complex, so your questions have extremely complex answers, which can't be fully accomplished in a short period of time. So the attempt at simplicity is the best approach. But as to your questions, because of the complexity of the answers, the simple explanation can be given that humans are evolving. Not only is the genetic template referred to as the body evolving, but the expansion into the illusory reality of the consciousness of the infinite nature is also taking place at the same time. They are all aspects of what is termed the most mysterious plan of the infinite being, which we are a part of. As for media, the situation of complexity lends its hand to insert inspiring beauty, which allows revelations from within to be expressed without. And so our media is evolving to show aspects of our goals into movies and other formats of entertainment, education, and most other areas, if not all. This also lends to many individuals finding their purposes or interacting along the timeline at any given point in the now. As to your question on how to handle these issues emotionally, each one is different, but still connected to all. So by refusing to allow the rampant moves generated by emotional content in one's life is a good method for dealing with that. Read The Seventh Sense, my book, to get a larger take on that. Personally, I've enjoyed the movies involved in the Matrix series. Well, they're not exact in their content. They display similarities of our situation, which make them very, very interesting. I really enjoy those movies. Within the illusory reality along the timeline, we're headed for many changes within this very century, which will dwarf the last 10,000 years all combined. So many changes will occur beginning very soon that will cause people to be shaking their heads and asking, what the heck is going on? But towards the end of this century, we will have accomplished the majority of humanity having evolved the seventh sense within their genetic templates, or as most term it, the body. Most can't even contemplate a simple ideal that events will unfold along the timeline, which will cause religions to go extinct nearly overnight. And nobody can really even understand how that could happen, but that's exactly what's going to take place towards the end of this century, right around the 2080s or so. That will take place towards the end of this century, though. But what will lead up to that point will be a combination of many facets of interaction with science leading that charge. It's very difficult to explain all these things in simple terms, but the seventh sense is the answer to correcting things that have been ongoing and continue to transpire in this illusory reality. It's very complex. So it's very difficult to articulate answers to your questions, considering that there's a lot of things that interfere with our understanding exactly what these answers mean, and your questions, the total validity of the questions you are asking. So, to conclude my response, I prefer not to give any advice to others, to point them to the inner path where their true teacher, their higher self, continues to attempt to get their attention, to get them to align and become like their higher self, which is their true self. And there's no other worthy teacher than that teacher. So I'll leave it, my answers there. Thank you.
Okay, so I thought that was incredible, because it's letting us know that things will really, really genuinely change. And while I was re-listening to that, I almost thought that even though there's only a few of us tonight, you're here for a reason, and I want you to gain the entire experience regardless. So I'm going to replay the questions that I asked, and then I'm going to answer them to the best of my ability, so that you guys can a little bit more. Being recorded, the software automatically records the live stream, so I can replay it. So at the end of the stream, I'm just going to put in the chat window, should I replay this at a later date, or even, at midnight or whatever, when more people will be around from different parts of the world. So it's important that we go down this rabbit hole and follow it through to the end. So let's begin by having a listen to the questions that I asked Mark, which formulated his response.
Morning, Mark. Just thought I'd get in early. I know you're probably still getting organised for your day. Still quite early there. But anyway, questions. Because you're busy, as you said, you've got a lot of expanded projects and you're quite busy at the moment. But you should be able to still, we can pre-record. So whatever you share with me on WhatsApp, I can play it back through the speakers of my system and then record it to the door, and then I can process it and play it out on a live stream so people can hear it. So the questions I would like us to address, or I'd like you to address, are as follows. Do you believe that the meta myth and the meta universe, when it comes to the media of today, that is the television and the films of today, the vision behind the director's vision, correlates directly with the expanded consciousness of the human condition on the planet? And if so, how do you see it affecting the future?
Okay. So what I'm asking here is basically, as I stated earlier in the beginning of the transmission, I've recently come into contact with a lot of millennial people who are from the millennial generation, the younger, more what I consider to be more laterally integrated into many networks and systems that support our societal reform, the real self-correction. And part and parcel of what I learned about that is that the language being used in the media that this generation is gravitating to is called metaphor, metaphorical reflection. That the media itself is actually self-aware. It's aware of the way that it's playing out. So it has a certain consciousness to it. Hence why I asked Mark, do you think that it's affecting the human consciousness? And what Mark was able to kind of share with me is that anything that allows a coming together, what we call a like-minded view or outlook, or even a hive mind, recognizing the hive mind that's also beginning to form in the now, anything that supports that is going to be of great benefit
to moving things forward in the timeline. The timeline as we know it was one that was predominantly embedded in a framework of duality. We felt that we needed one thing to always balance another, otherwise we couldn't really see through it. And that gives us what's called a very 3D view of our experience. And within that lay conditionality, lay programming, lay, archetypes, belief structures, and predominantly a lot of rather distorted filters through which we were all living out our lives and have been for millennia. This new method being exposed to and immersed in, is changing that timeline out of that 3D experience into a more 5D experience. And perhaps I can go into what is considered to be the new language that's predominantly associated with the fifth density experience. Many of us are operating seamlessly in the fifth density experience and no longer being beholden to what the 3D used to represent to us. The 3D, in the most simplest analogy I can muster at this stage, would be the fact that we're no longer being beholden to the behavioral patterns of our past. We no longer view our cycle of existence through a distorted filter. We no longer operate in the student of the recycle program, and that we feel as if we are able to become much more expansive in the way that our mind circuit, what many refer to as the brain in the spacesuit, has the ability to move beyond exploration and experience, which is what focused consciousness is all about. And the media of today, like I said, Watchmen, the OA, Game of Thrones, The Return, all the Marvel stuff, Undone, all the anime, it all contains what is known as meta language. The modern monomyth is something that we've been discussing in the alternate Twin Peaks stream of consciousness. And that meta language means that it gives us an opportunity to look at things that are already self-aware, so they already know how they're playing out. The vision behind the visual experience, the oral experience, is something that has a consciousness to itself. And that is helping to shape the way that we look at our lives more and more, and help us to transcend any limitations and or boundaries that we create, which keep us trapped in the lower vibration. So I wanted to share that with you as a response to that, as part of the context to the new timeline. So let's go forward. Context to moving away from the language of the mind and into the more language of unity, where we're seeing a fairly large lateral integration of the millennials into a more biosphere consciousness. So how does meta, the meta universe, that is media, that is self-aware, correlate with the expansion of human consciousness today? I'll just jump in there for a second and simply say that when you think about the language of the mind, that is when our compartmentalized view of the world pretty much shapes our environment, and our environment is very much kind of bordered or bounded in by the rigidity of the 3D. So the meta language allows us to move past the language of the mind and very much into this new language of unity, where everything is co-creative, everything is a conscious collaboration for a higher service and a greater good that supports
the evolution of humanity more and more. So I think that that is what we wanted to address in answering that question. Let's move forward.
That's number one. The second one is, how does the compressive state of our species consciousness best be dealt with from an emotional perspective? So how do, everyone's feeling incredibly compressed at the moment. They're feeling rather stifled, almost like there's not a lot of air for them to breathe, and you feel, rather labored in your breathing. So people are feeling very compressed. How can they ultimately deal with that from an emotional state?
Okay, this is a really, really good question, because this affects all you guys. And just want to say some shout outs. Yeah, I see a couple. Thanks a lot. Ron Dawson for coming in. Thanks, Manu. I noticed that you've been here before, so I really appreciate you coming back. Most of you, if you're really true and honest with yourselves, and if you go back to what Mark said as far as the biggest shift that's going to happen to human consciousness in the next 50, 20 years matter, is currency. The expression of authenticity is going to become the new currency. It's going to be the means by which we're going to be able to build new relationships, see through a much clearer lens, and allow a filter of discernment to drive us forward in the right manner and to help us to make informed decisions. Transparency is absolutely key. So to answer this particular question about how we're all feeling compressed, I've been getting text messages from certain females and certain people saying, I feel like sandpaper being rubbed up the wrong way. I feel like I can't say a right word because I'm judged, and that everybody's got this kind of ridiculous high expectation of what they want from me, and I just don't feel very supported emotionally. So we become triggered as a result. And when we become triggered, the internal programming that's very much keeping us compartmentalized in this, what I call the prison consciousness, the lower vibration, is to allow our emotions to well up and to respond in a reactionary manner. And most of us react in a bad way, right? We react from a convergence point of ego. We allow our ego to take center stage and to falsely represent really what our heart is feeling. So we override the electrical impulse charges in our heart, and we emit a false charge through the ego when we're responding to feeling, like I said, compressed and stifled. And this kind of function is very much part of what is known as the newly evident compressive cycles of the moon and its lunar cycle. So at the beginning of any new moon, we feel very receptive. We are ready to receive. So our cellular structure is very uncompressed. It's almost as if the water is replenished, it's purified cells, and we're ready to receive new data packets of information. We're ready to receive new sentient transmissions, or not so sentient, whatever, because part and parcel of this life on the Gaia classroom is also to engage and to deal and nurture our darker shadow self, which not many people want to do. And that's where they're fucking up, because they can't understand that their doppelganger, their darker shadow self, is part of their own conscious expression. It's part of their conscious evolution more and more. So we're very uncompressed at the beginning of the new moon cycle, and as we go through the different
the gibbous and the wane and all that kind of thing till we get to the full moon, we get more and more and more and more compressed to the point where we're at bursting point, and then we release and we surrender through the expression of forgiveness so that we can begin the cycle all over again. Well, with these planets, as I explained at the beginning of this transmission, we're feeling like there's no air there seems to be no air in the sky. There's no air in our universe. It's hard to breathe, and we feel predominantly as if we're under fire all the time. So our emotions need to be retuned. And one of the things that I like to do, and when I offer these insights and examples, they only ever come from my own personal experience. I'm not drawing from, somebody's, how-to guidebook. I don't believe in that bullshit for a second. I believe that we all have the ability, the capacity and the capability from our internal space to deal with whatever we need to deal with in the most pure and sentient manner we can. So what I like to do, in addition to obviously deeper meditation, calming the alpha waves by listening to the 432 hertz music, or if you can get into the, the delta waves or the theta and the beta waves, even better, because it calms the alpha waves, the algorithms within the mind circuit, to a point where you create a neutral balance in the amplitude, that is your frequency, and then that clears the monkey chatter, right? Quietens the mind to a point where you no longer feel as if you're being dragged into the third-party drama and the mire of other interactions, and you start to generate greater clarity through the third eye, and the third eye is able to help you make informed decisions. Come from your capacity within your compartmentalized beingness. You shouldn't have to sit there and think it through, right? Hence why they talk about the left hemisphere of the brain versus the right hemisphere. When you get to a point of oneness where gratitude is your grounding principle, now you go to me, science said the other thing. Well, I'm sorry, but science doesn't always get it right. And for those that are truly advanced at a higher octave of intelligence, everything we're going through in this incarnation, if you like, this cycle of our existence, can be attributed to the particle and the wave duality theory and principle. Now, if someone wants to write in the chat that yes, that would be really curious, would be the right word. I'm curious to learn more about, I'll do it. But if I try and get into it here, it's just going to confuse their lives more than anything. And that's not an easy thing to do. So the short answer is through meditation, through grounding to your oneness, you retune your emotional state that draws you in a closer connection to God, or whatever you consider God to be. God is a particle that we either collapse into a lucid state or we collapse into a solidified state. And it forms thought, and from thought we generate form. And that form is then basically manifested in the form of physical experience. And physical experience is what we create action around and interaction around. It's that simple, really. So tune your emotion, the tuning fork in any given circumstance when you feel really compressed like this, and the universe will rally to your side and support you by allowing you the worthiness to move out of what's keeping you compressed. So, practical example. How many of you have rolled up? It's a lovely day. It might be a barbecue. It might be, pre-get together for a few drinks and whatever before you go out, but you come into a little group of people and it's a nice vibe, and then all of a sudden someone walks in, they say something or their actions trigger something, and there's a certain amount of uneasiness that comes over you. That's because frequency hits your particular vibration at a distorted level. And when you get distorted frequencies, what happens? You get dissonance. You get distorted to the point where it starts to make you feel ill. And when you get that kind of ill at ease feeling, that's your worthiness telling you, hey, I've got to remove myself from this. So remove yourself, and it's not being egoic, and it's not being uncompassionate, and it's not being available to share. It's just you using a filter of discernment to nurture and nourish what serves your highest good. So get the fuck away from wherever you are, because it's not helping you any. And I've done a lot of people in this last year. 2019 was a year of discernment where I looked at relationships through these filters, these clearer filters, and I said, you know what? It's just not working. It's not that I don't want to be your friend. It's not that I don't want to hang out with you. It's not that I don't find you engaging. It's just that you're on a different tangent to me, and I don't want that to infect or effect my energy field. I don't see love's liberating light and intention in what you are and what you represent. So I'm hoping a lot of people are kind of nodding their heads in their own space now, going, fuck yeah, man, I totally know exactly where you're coming from. So we could talk a lot about that if you want. We could talk about the becoming the tuning fork in any given situation by allowing yourself, through your worthiness and through the expression of your valor, right? You got to be valorous in this world, man. You got to be able to be the true, authentic energy warrior that you are. As Mark said, be transparent, be real. And if people don't like it, fuck them. Right? That's it. I'm going to use that kind of language because that kind of language gets the response of people going, yeah, man, that's how I feel about it too. It's not judging. You're not judging someone by doing it. You're doing it with a smile. You're doing it in your heart space. You're allowing your heart to speak for you. Okay? So that's really what the answer to that particular question is how do we deal with it from an emotional point? I'll tell you, sit in the void. When he used to tell me that, he said, Mike, you just got to sit in the void, man. What's happening here? Just sit in the void. Oh, I'm going, just sit in the void. It's all well and good to tell someone to sit in the void and for me to tell you to sit in the void, but it's not as easy as it sounds. First of all, you have to define in your own definition of self, what is the void? Where is my particular expression of the void? How do I ground into the void? And so on and so on. So perhaps, if someone wants to write there that, hey man, yeah, let's talk about more about the void. Let's talk about drawing our higher self into support future event streams in our lives and all that. I'm happy to do so. I will also share at this point that I have my own podcasts. Okay, I have my own podcasts, which are weekly, and they cover different subject matter, but predominantly the esoteric value of alchemy in the modern age, you know? So I'll just put that as a link in the live stream now for those that are wanting to go a bit deeper, which is really important, okay? The next thing that Mark asked me, and that Mark responded to, was this particular question. In the harmonic resonance of the planet, the lifting of the Schumann resonance, the compression of the photon belt around the Allen belt of the planet, all those sorts of things to bring it into a more sort of a conscious focus, and then allowing that to be sort of received by the individuated aspects of the people in the audience. If you could perhaps kind of look into that, that'd be great. All right, thanks, buddy. Trying to find this third question. I think the third question was, can you remember any particular media, movies or TV shows that really helped you to further understand how your own consciousness, because media is definitely a vehicle. It's a very deliberate vehicle. For a long time, it was used as a vehicle to create layers of deception within a deeply integrated program that we were all playing and leading. And then nowadays, as I said before about the meta language, it's kind of the way that we're integrating the organic part of our spacesuit is integrating with the AI, the artificial intelligence that we're fabricating in an effort to streamline many of our physical processes. One thing I'm discussing a couple of weeks back is that as consciousness evolves, as we become more expansive beings within the greater cosmology of our position in the multiverse, the AI transmissions become intensified. The signal that the compartmentalized brain, the mind circuit receives, is a much heightened, sensitive and or amplified signal. And for many, it really upsets the natural algorithm of life. You know, when you wake up in the morning and sometimes, you know, you've got the gratitude principle flowing through you, heart space open, you feel a very grounded, blissful and joy, and you're able to forge forward in your day and really make something beautiful happen with all of the event streams that you engage to. Talk is floating aimlessly on the ocean of the cosmos. Then there are other days where you wake up and you feel, like I stated before, this compressive weight that is compressive energy. You kind of feel as if the four walls of your environment are closing in on you, and that is the time you need to remove yourself from the structure and get back into grounding to nature. You know, the chi of the natural world is a form of nourishment, a form of sustenance that replenishes and recalibrates the different receptors within spacesuit to handle things better.
Alrighty, so we're going to leave it there, and we're going to take a few calls now and get into more of a Q&A about what's going on. So here we go. This is Riki.
Okay, brilliant.
Okay, so basically, you're in a situation at the moment where you've left your comfort zone of England, and you decided to, you know, pull whatever resources and money that you had, and you bought a road bike, and you're cycling all the way across to southern Spain, right?
That's right, yeah, it's been very epic.
And I'm sure that a lot of people, you know, who'll get to know you will want to hear about that. But let's sort of stay on point and what's your immediate reaction, if you don't mind me asking, to what you heard Mark talking about as far as the splitting of the timeline?
Well, I think that basically the main thing for me to understand, and probably for a lot of us, is that our choices right now do matter, and they're affecting our future timelines. So, you know, so it's the realization that we really are co-creating, you know, the future, and what we do matters more than we ever realize, you know.
And do you understand essentially how everyone has that opportunity to step into their power and be able to, to deliver that in such a way?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, really, you think about it, for thousands of years, maybe, for a lot of powerlessness, as if we don't have the power to make changes, we have higher authority sort of, who are leading the way, rather than realizing that we have the power ourselves. And I think humanity is starting to realize this now, because, we're starting to realize if everybody does a small part in helping the planet, that things will, we are starting to realize the power that we've got. But it's slow going. But I feel like what we're trying to do here with this group of us who are coming together is sort of open up a doorway, a pathway of truth that is very potent, which allows the whole process to be a lot easier, I suppose, and people to become empowered and actually really, move the ship forward, I suppose, as you would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, it all gets down to what we call the divine timing, when things are in the river of ease and grace, and how people are starting to kind of look at their emotions, look at their response triggers, look at the way that they do to other people in any circumstance. And it's a good segue that leads me into something we discussed earlier, which we were going to talk about. And that was this particular language that we've been discussing. And if you remember, I picked up a post on social media, and it said, "I trust you is a better compliment than I love you, because you may not always trust the person you love, but you can always love the person you trust." What are your thoughts on that, Rickster?
Well, I mean, it's trust is, I suppose it's something that you feel, from the higher self with the other person, at least what we have between me and you, very close friends, that is very powerful. The trust is almost more powerful in a way than the love, so I suppose they're interchangeable, aren't they, really? They're
very interchangeable, because it means that we have the capacity and the capability to collapse what we once thought as the solidified, completely different. Now, I think that when we look at something like that, we can say that, why are you even asking me if I trust you or not? And how that is the gateway to me loving you, when if I am already allowing self-love to be the core focus of what I'm all about, and how I'm going to internalize that before I, send that out, radiate that out to others, then I shouldn't have to ask ever anyone if I trust you or not, right?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And we're talking about how, when we trust ourselves, that field of energy, because people can sense that, and they know, okay, this person is self-assured, and I trust them because they trust us. That makes sense. And we're talking about the whole thing about self-worth, and, when you don't believe in yourself, when you have this low self-image, people sense that, and it's almost like sometimes it's like a portal, that lets in negativity, I suppose, because if you don't respect that, people don't treat you as much with respect, so it's the same with the thing with the trust, so the more we can really see ourselves in a true light, respect ourselves, which not everyone has, and that's why you talk a lot about the valor, and the and all that, and self-respect, then obviously that ripples out and affects our reality around us.
That reality that we're talking about is essentially something that becomes more defined and more available for us to contribute to, get in tune with our doppelganger, when we basically start to experience our darker shadow self, you know. And I think that's where people in a kind of in a sort of a confused state as to how do I go about doing that, or you know, straight away. Would you say that's something that you've been able to come into connection with and be able to, you know, integrate and implement in your life?
Well, you mean darker shadow aspects?
Yeah.
I mean, like for me, you know, I mean, I've only just got started with it, and I suppose the hardest thing for anyone to do is to truly look at themselves and see, you know, where am I lying to myself? Am I being authentic with myself and all that? And that's not been part of the program for thousands of years, I suppose, because, you know, you think about in regard to getting energy from others, or, you know, because this is how the paradigm is being, get energy from others, get money, or, you know, the whole work ethic is about putting on a face and becoming this different creature. So in a way, there's a lot of fear for people to be their authentic self, because the idea is that if I be authentic and be real, I'll be abandoned, or I'll be whatever, you know, rejected. So these are things deep in the psyche of man, and they probably go beyond this life, you know, this accumulation of all these things in our shadow through the thousands of years, you know. So we're trying to undo programming that runs very deep, you know. But yeah, for me, you know, I'm beginning to see where these limitations and where these fears come from, and see where my shadow, for instance, you know, he wants attention because as a child maybe I didn't get enough attention, you know. So it's a matter of me giving myself attention and respecting myself, and not essentially needing to draw that energy, you know, from others. So, and that's a nice place to be in, you know, where we don't need so much from the world, you know. And part of coming out here and being out in the wild, you know, and not knowing where my money's coming from, you know, and you know, having to go out and busk and sort of trust, you know, because I might only have a euro a day, or I might have you know, 50 euros in a day. But that sort of world where we can't predict what's going to happen, you really end up putting your faith, trust in, because you can't cling to the stability, you know. And I think, you know, our shadow self is always trying to get us to be safe, while also, funnily at the same time, elements like recklessness and behavior that's very out of, can come from the shadow, obviously, because it can be almost like an inner desperation in that part of us to release, or to have their needs met, or, you know, be seen. So it's like, this is where you get like behavior, you know, like going out, getting drunk, you know, and all that, and getting really wasted. And then, of course, a lot of people are annoyed because, you know, that they want to have a balanced life, but because they're not accepting their shadow, they're going nuts, you know, at the weekend sort of thing. And, you know, so we are trying to return to a state of balance. And the one thing we need to be doing is learning, and this is the hard thing, but learning to accept all that is. And like you were saying in one of your podcasts about, you know, being okay with the idea that there are rapists and serial killers and all these things. It's not to say that, you know, you accept it happening in a it's just saying that you're coming to peace, you know, with what is. We need to be able to be okay with all of life, and that is what this is all about. It's about being, well, it's big, isn't it? You know, it's about being present, being with us, and that's not always the most easy thing to do, but that will empower us as humans and open up beautiful timelines for us and the planet, you know.
Well, I think if you can formulate the whole ideal that you just spoke about around addictions, right? When I was addicted, you know, to alcohol and to cigarettes and, you know, and smoking and herbs and all that kind of thing, then I was able to collapse my own doppelganger into the particle that my doppelganger was into a solidified embodied form of fear. And that embodied form of fear was basically, you know, pushing my flight or fight and keeping me in a survivalist mode where I became very self-aware in any given moment whether or not my safety or my security was being threatened. And then when you let the addiction go, when you reverse engineer what the addictions have done, then automatically your doppelganger, your darker shadow self, will manifest in a much more clarified manner through a more, through a more filter, and you're going to be able to reason with it, right? You don't sort of, encapsulate the collapsing, into a lucid state. If it's going to be a lucid state that's going to be all wrapped up in fear, you collapse that into something that brings all manner of probability and possibility forward, so that you can grow as a human being, so that you can interact as a human being with nature and with the greater expanse of the cosmos. And your doppelganger wants to do exactly that too, right? It's just that you're so used to always drawing it out when you're really, really in that fight or flight or that fear mode. You sort of understand what I mean by that?
So it's, these are outdated ways of coping, really, addiction. It's like, I think because obviously I feel that understanding has been lost down the generations, but I do feel like there were times like Lemuria and other times in ancient history where we did know what to do with it, and we had a bit more wisdom in that way. But because there's been this sort of fall from grace in a way, it's no wonder we've attached to these, to image or to money or to addictions, or to sex or gambling and all that, because the solution hasn't been, so clear. But yeah, I mean, it all makes sense. And in breaking that, there's so much liberation, like in breaking the addiction and feel how powerful you are. Because I always say that, when we break these addictions, we're basically saying to the universe, I'm ready. I want this. I want to grow. Because you are going on every single day like cricket. And you were saying, like, through my willpower, I will break this. And from now on, every day, I've broken this pattern. And that's a massive timeline change, but then, of course, the shadow does come up and, emotions come up. Or you feel more sensitive. But that's the beauty of life. It's like there's so much beauty in that when you do feel more sensitive and you feel what you feel. And then you start to feel compassion for other people who are stuck in these, terrible, really is a terrible, it's a grey, addictive space which does not serve the spirit. It's just almost like being in a stagnated space. It serves its purpose for the time, but it's not really the real growth that we're all seeking.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, man. I think at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're reflecting upon the way your own personal experience has, changed and shifted since you left the comfort zone. And this is back to what we said at the very, very beginning of this particular transmission, that you've got to look at the energies that we're being surrounded by, right? The Mars in Scorpio thing, opposing Uranus and Taurus, and yet conjuncting at exactly the same time with Venus in Jupiter and with the Sun in Sagittarius and a new moon there is. It's like feeling incredibly open to being expansive, but at the same time feeling kind of like, well, what's my agenda here? What am I really, really trying to consciously focus on? Because, Scorpio is always kind of polarizing that energy of hiding and suppressing me to a greater degree. And the fact that, Venus hasn't conjuncted Jupiter since 1905, right? Think back to what was going on back in 1935. Well, come on, man. I mean, it's almost to the point of ridiculous. This is an energy we're never, ever going to... So we look at the way that energy, which is essentially creating the field in which we're expressing ourselves, in which we're transmitting, as multidimensional beings there is a certain level of suppression, which of course is then going to, feed the fear or embody more of the fear, the more solidified version of the fear. And yet there is this need to be expansive at the same time. So it's difficult. It's difficult because people don't really understand the way their emotions are distorting the way that they're reacting to certain things, right? They're easily triggered. Most people, a big number tonight, which is really great. Most people are in some way, shape or form experiencing deceptive emotional triggers. Now, that's worth deeper discussion, because does it mean that when those other opposing energies lift in the cosmos that we're going to feel a greater sense of relief and therefore a certain level of our clarity will come back? Well, normally I would say yes. But now, after being what I've been through and the way I've fused the electrical charge of my doppelganger with my own, charged particle aspect of self, I'm at the point where if people are so beholden to their habits, their habituated patterns, and the way they tend to kind of run the spiral dynamic, then I think they find it even more difficult to deal with. What do you think?
So basically, do you think that, things are going to be harder because of that?
I think it's going to be more pronounced, more intensified.
And I think that's what's coming up, because the more clear we get, in a way, the more we see what's really there, the more it's like bang in your face, whereas in the state of denial that people have been in, we're going around in these patterns, but we're not really seeing it clearly. It's not coming up in our face, And the things, we're at a point on the earth where we can't deny anymore, aren't we? Let's face it, because, even the media is what we're doing to the planet, So it's like the general population, can't deny. And I think that that's good. That's good. And it's bringing everything into conscious focus, Obviously the planets and everything, they do have an effect on us. But, a lot of these things come from our own trauma and that, a lot of these patterns and that.
Do you want to talk about trauma and how we've been dragging it along from incarnation to part of our karmic? Think a little about your own experiences that relates to that, because part and parcel of the same energy, right? Jupiter is a very expansive. The planet of Venus is still the expression of the higher octaves of love and compassion. So the amount of need to express these things at the deepest and the highest level of beingness.
Yeah, obviously that compassion's needed, and we're talking about resolution here, I suppose, resolution of experiences that complete trauma gets stuck in our system, and I do think that if we had lived in a tribal sort of culture, a lot of them, I know they're not all perfect, but a lot of them, someone in the culture will know what to do when someone has a trauma, so you go through something difficult like a trauma. The issue is that if there's no one there after the experience, if nobody around you knows how to help you deal with it and get through it, and you could get through it in, a month or two, but the way it works in this society, which is like, just get on with it, ignore everything, it gets internalized, and that's more the issue, because, we live in a world where there's probability of anything happening, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So trauma is a natural thing that happens, but what is not healthy is the suppression, but yeah, so of course I've had my trauma like everyone has, and of course dropping the addictions, the trauma comes more into focus, which for many would seem negative, but it's a great thing because you become clear of where your pain is and what's going on there. And in a way, the pain doesn't seem to affect you so much, rather than being subservient to it, which is what we want. We want to be able to stand in our power and be able to face all things without getting caught in the drama of them. It's like saying, I'm not a victim because right now I'm strong enough to transmute this energy, whether if it's grief, I'm strong enough to be able to deal with it, to allow the body to release the grief and the pain,
Yeah.
But the one thing that I was realizing again last night was that these traumas and these experiences, I had a deep sense that they probably have repeated themselves through the eons, through centuries. So in some kind of way, we are reliving through lifetimes experience that hasn't been dealt with. And this is the thing that I suppose a lot of humanity, through denial, we don't face, So in other words, because we are in denial, we are allowing patterns to perpetuate themselves through the universe and through lifetimes, whereas with what we want to accept and integrate all that is, we stop that negative cycle, going on and on through the eons, So, for example, there's this thing, which I don't know in detail, but between men and women, there's typical sort of responses, like women are like this, they don't trust men, but whatever people think, you'll notice even through all the countries of the earth, there are typical responses, so we're talking about core wounds and sort of ancestral wounds. There's a word for the deeper sort of the deeper experience that goes beyond this, like the collective, the collective pain body, the collective shadow. I suppose what we're talking about is not just healing our own life experience, and transmuting it, but once we unpeel the layers of our own life, and of course in doing this it's amazing because once we heal our own traumas, we become free of the burden of it, and our whole vibration lifts and we feel liberated, and that only affects everyone else. But it's almost like once we've done that stage, the universe is ready to say, right, okay, what's beyond, process things from beyond this life, and what was coming out last night, that's why I so want to say this in this podcast, is that there's some experiences that go back thousands of years ago, maybe Lemuria, and there's something for us to learn and take from those experiences that hasn't quite been understood. So in other words, through understanding our ancient lineage, we can better understand today. And that's at school I didn't really like history, but but the funny thing is like through learning our history, we can learn not to repeat the same mistakes and truly integrate past experiences, because I don't feel they are properly have properly been integrated. For instance, I'll just lastly say, like in regards to like World War I, World War II, like when I travel and I go back to England, I can feel that energy of World War I and II in energetically around the towns, and that, especially the ones where the war was, the impact was bigger. And so we're not just talking that you can see it in the architecture and the way, society is, but you can feel this energy there of suppression, and it's almost as if it hasn't been dealt with, so people carry the traumas not just from their own life, but from before. So it's really big, really, but yeah.
No, that's great, man. You're on a bit of a roll. I'm just welcoming a few more people to the podcast. Just seeing Micah now has just arrived as well. So
wonderful.
Quite a few people. And obviously it's interesting because you see here in Australia, it's 2 a.m. So, and on Monday morning. So most people obviously would be getting ready for the work week. In America, it's actually Saturday night, Sunday morning. Over there where you are, you're currently in Spain. What time is it there now?
4 o'clock.
4 o'clock in the afternoon. So then people from your neck of the woods, they wouldn't have a problem kind of like, getting aside. So well, Ashu's got a question for us. So please ask your question. Anything that you feel that we could definitely shine some light on, Ashu. You can also call in if you like, or you can just basically write in the chat box what you're looking to try to understand. While you're formulating that, we've been talking about the splitting of the timeline, that humanity has arrived at a particular point in its own conscious evolution where there is enough empowered and or enlightened souls to begin to create a more heightened and a more sensitive perception of their environment in the way that they express themselves with others, and predominantly the way that they now live, on the planet, that we are creating a kind of fragmented or splinter groups that are no longer experiencing the same amnesia that the bulk of the population have been pretty much under that veil. Riki, your thoughts along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's going on. And this isn't about, wanting to create a group that's kind of just safe and away from, because obviously with society and the way it is, you could easily think, oh, well, we need to just get away from all of it and deny it all. But we're talking about creating a group that is empowering each other to be the highest and truest aspect, obviously, of each other. So, and what you were saying, because Mike, you talked about our language and how language needs to be sort of almost shifted and changed to express life more clearly, and especially from this new viewpoint, from what we've understood and experienced and seen as a more true reality than what we've been fed, to allow that new language to emerge, so almost as if we've got a grounded foundation of how to live in a more true and harmonious way, but not in a typical sort of hippie utopia, this is a dream kind of way, but more of a lucid, grounded, way of living, and languages needs shifting, so